Hello everyone and welcome to Sinful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the grey. And so today, we're going to talk a little bit about players' code, players' etiquette, and I guess generally being a good person at the tabletop. This is something that I think maybe gets talked about every once and again when there's maybe a scandal online of someone cheating, maybe they're in a big position of power or whatever. Or, you know, it might happen in your friendly gaming group where you feel like someone was doing something that wasn't really the truth. And now, before we get into this, I want to say on cheating and stuff like that, like, it's not acceptable, but mistakes do happen, and that is where you need to be careful. It's important that when you're thinking someone is cheating, you in fact maybe taking the thing that maybe they are just got something wrong, and to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think a common thing you can find in general when you're looking at players cheating is there'll be things happening again and again and again. If there's not those things happening again and again and again, they're probably just making a few mistakes. Or they might be eager, might be forgetting something, might be a little bit over-eager in how they're acting, might be just trying to speed themselves up. They might be going too quick through their thought process because they're either, I guess, panicking, they're taking too long, or stuff like that. There's always things that can happen that make this not an issue, that maybe you might find you're making a mountain out of a molehill of, that might not actually be there or be an intentional thing there and anything, I guess, malicious. Anyway, I want to get talking about the Player's Code because in the General's Handbook 2019, Games Workshop published a little thing called the Player's Code in there, and I want to talk a little bit about all of that, go over all the points they talk about in there, and just sort of give some thoughts and backgrounds and context as to why we do these things, why we don't do these things, and maybe add a little bit more to the points that they make in that book, because I do think it's a really interesting thing. And for those coming into the hobby, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable might not be something they're familiar with. And there may be these little things that I guess players of the game know that happen in a certain way, and you do things a certain way, that, you know, a newer player might innocently make a mistake and not see where the problem is, but maybe this video can help them sort of, I guess, gauge what we do in the community as a whole. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts and your pet peeves and pet likes of like playing against someone, not playing against someone. What do you like to do? But let's get cracking into the video. This is the Player's Code, and we're going to have a talk through GW's version of it in the 2019 General's Handbook. So let's start out with the two cardinal rules that they put down in their Player's Code. And the first is always be polite and respectful, and the second, always tell the truth and never cheat. I think these are pretty stock standard for any sort of game, whether you're playing a game of football or a game of cards, a computer game, or whatever. Always be polite and respectful is just a good standing of a person to be. Like, there's no need to be rude, abrasive, offensive, or anything like that at the table. You should always be aiming to be, as I see it, I always want to be the opponent I hope that I could verse. So what I want in an opponent is what I try to be as an opponent for other people. I try to refrain from swearing, I try to refrain from complaining, getting agitated, being distracted, and in general, just make sure my focus is on the game, my opponent, and all that. And, you know, this can sometimes get a little hard. I do get distracted very, very easily. That maybe is my own personal problem, but, you know, I try my best to keep focused on the game that's at hand. Always telling the truth and never cheat is important. Like, I always aim to know my rules to the best of my ability, and I can't say I'm perfect. I don't think anyone can ever say they're perfect. Sometimes you get rules wrong, but this is where having things like your rulebook and all that sort of stuff on hand to check yourself. The Age of Sigma app is fantastic for me going, I mean, the amount of times I get Griffhounds wrong on 4s and 3s or 3s and 4s, I can never remember what order that is that their stat blind for their attacks works on. I check. And this is why you have battle tomes, war scroll cards, all that sort of stuff is great. These two rules, like, there's no if and or buts to any of this. These are the two rules that should always be followed. And I don't think in just gaming, I think in general in life, these are the two rules you should always follow. Let's start talking about all the different principles that they put down. The first one, arrive on time with all your things you need to play the game. Now, this goes without saying that, like, time can be a bit of a hassle at times. Funny. Yeah, you're not always going to arrive on time, but I definitely think when you're getting into organised competitive play, timing and arriving on time for rounds, events, and games at the tables and all that sort of stuff is massively important. In your friendly local game store, no one's going to mind if you're 5 minutes late. Let everyone know if you're running late for games. There may be other people wanting to use the table that you and your friend have secured, especially at the time where at the moment you're generally having to book tables at stores due to a whole bunch of restrictions and stuff. But all your things you need to play the game is making sure you arrive with them is definitely an important one. Make sure you have your own dice, your own combat gauges, your models, everything you need. Right down to some spare super glue. All this stuff is important, and it really just comes into it having to use your own and not relying on your opponent to have all this stuff there for you to play the game is massively important. And you can find cool bits of stuff. I'm definitely going to put together a video talking about all the things you may need for your game, but definitely just making sure you have all those basic essentials: dice, tape measure, models, and all that sort of stuff is really important. Offer to shake your opponent's hand before and after the game. Now, obviously, contact and all that sort of stuff in our current times is, a bit hit and miss with wherever you are, depending whether it's acceptable to do so or safe to do so. But I think this stems down to sportsmanship. There is just an air of sportsmanship of saying hi, hello, and then thank you, goodbye at the end of a game. Well played, well met, and all that sort of stuff. Just the general sort of part of being a good sport at the table. Whether you win or lose, whether you're dreading the army your opponent's brought because they brought the filthiest net list they can, or whether you're really looking forward to playing an old friend you haven't played in ages, I think just the greeting and the goodbye at the table is massively important. Be respectful to your opponent and treat them how you would want to be treated. Avoid using language your opponent may find offensive. This, I think, just comes down to, once again, just being mindful of where you are. You generally, when you're playing games, especially at a friendly local game store or a Games Workshop store or whatever, tournament, etc., you're going to be in a public space. Be mindful of what you're saying, how you're acting, and remember to be respectful to all people. This, in general, is just, another one very similar to the point before of just respecting your opponent, respecting the people who've taken the time out of their day to come play a game of Warhammer with you. Now, I won't say that I am any saint in any way. I swear an absolute ton. Working in kitchens for life, and generally Australians tend to swear a little bit more than most. Swearing is definitely something I try to keep my mind on, and the odd one slips out. And if anything very untoward slips out, I will generally apologise to my opponent for my language. And of course, it's always being respectful of definitely not touching any sort of areas of talk that should not be touched. I am most certainly try to be aware of everything I'm saying and make sure that everything I say is respectful to all people at all times. Next, ask your opponent's permission if you wish to use any unpainted models or proxy models. Now, I definitely think unpainted models is maybe a little bit too far in a friendly sort of game. However, I do like using my own painted models, so I generally try to take painted armies when I'm playing against my opponents. Even in fairly local wide day tournaments where painting isn't a requirement, I generally try to take my painted stuff because it makes me feel good, and it makes me feel good knowing I'm giving my opponent a nice army to look across the table on. Proxy models, I think, is where the bigger issue is in general. You should always try to make your proxy models represent what they're trying to represent as clear as possible. They should be able to look across the tabletop, and your proxied Frostlord on Stonehorn should remind me and make me think of a Frostlord on Stonehorn. I should be able to pick that knowing and just by looks of what your model is. So both these things, it's generally nice to talk to your opponent about what sort of game they want to have in general and whether or not they want to use these sorts of things in their games. Offer your opponent a chance to examine your army roster before the game begins. This is another one of just one of those things to take along to your games, whether it's, I guess, recorded on your phone on one of the many apps, whether that be War Scroll Builder, AOS Reminders, Azir, Battlescribe, whatever. Just having your army roster there available for your opponent to have a look at, going, oh, cool, this, and this, oh, this is this model. And this can also help determine your opponent and enable them to realize what proxy models may be in your army as well. So just giving them a chance, they know what your artifacts, they're able to do a little bit of research, go, oh, and what does this do, etc. Just having your army list there is a great thing to do. It enables you to, both you and your opponent, to remember everything about your army. Next, answer any questions your opponent has about your army and the rules that apply to your army. So this is a great one. Once again, this is just continuing on sort of the, I guess, theme of your opponent taking a look at your army list. I'm sure after looking at your army list, they're going to ask you, what does this command trait do? What does this artifact here do? What does this spell do? Etc. It is really good that you make sure you tell your opponent, like, oh, this one provides a -1 to hit if I cast it on you. You don't have to go into great detail. Like, you go, oh, it's very short ranged, and your opponent gets a general idea. If they ask more questions, answer those questions. Like, it's really respectful just to give out that information. Not only that, but generally a lot of the rules in Age of Sigmar bar artifacts command traits are free to view, so your opponent's going to know about them and can find about them anyway. There's no victory to speak of if you sort of don't tell your opponent and your opponent doesn't know about a particular artifact and what it does, and you win a game because of that. Is that really a victory because you've sort of, I guess, duped your opponent out of the victory? There's no reason, I think, that you shouldn't tell your opponent, oh, this is what my spell does, this is what my artifact does, this is what my command trait does. Your opponent doesn't have to see like all your tactics and your sort of everything pieced together, but telling them all the bits and pieces of like, oh, this does this and this does this, allows them to like know what to expect, and they in turn should do the same towards you. You should answer, both of you, all questions that are available to make sure there's no confrontations later in the game. Measure moves and distances carefully and accurately. This should come as no brainer because purposely not doing this is, well, cheating. But I think there's a great way you can do this. For starters, like tape measures only go so far, I find. I think tape measures are great when doing large distances with nothing in between, but this is where having like combat gauges and measuring sticks of different sizes can really be useful because it allows you to do this at a much more accurate sort of level that your opponent's not going to have any doubts as to how far you're moving. So generally what I like to do is have like 3, 6 and 9 measuring sticks, or combat gauge, and then the 6 and 9 measuring sticks, and then use my tape measure for the longer movements or the longer ranges. And even then, like shooting attacks and all that sort of stuff, you can use multiple of your measuring sticks to sort of make like an 18-inch range shooting attack to sort of get that much more accurate distance on your ability spells, shooting attacks, etc. Find this is a really great way. Combat gauges are amazing, as are measuring sticks. Really great to have those different tools to enable you to accurately measure and your distances and moves properly throughout the whole course of the game. Give your opponent a chance to examine your dice rolls before picking up the dice. Another good one that's just generally, I guess, a nice thing to do. 2 things on this. Like, first of all, roll your dice out in the open. I've actually found in my more recent games playing with like a dice tray makes this, really easy. Sometimes you'll have so many dice, the dice tray doesn't work, but using a dice tray for important rolls and like characters casting of spells and movement and priority rolls and stuff like that is a really great way to do it. So definitely rolling out in the open or using a dice tray is my preferred method. Also, something I like to do is I like to pick out misses and let my opponent see my successes. This is a great way to do it. I believe picking out misses, because you're taking away dice that don't mean anything good for you first, so your opponent can see the dice that are good rather than seeing the dice that are bad. So in your opponent, there's less tension on that because your opponent is knowing the dice you're taking away from the pool are not going to be used again. So there's no advantage to you getting them. Ask permission before touching any of your opponent's models. So once again, this is just another one of respecting your opponent. Their miniatures may be fragile, brittle, or they might just generally not like people touching them. And that's completely fine. Just always, if you're going to have to touch your opponent's models, just ask them if it's okay, if, can I move this model over here, or do you want me to grab that model out the way for you? And be gentle and respectful when you do so. Remind your opponent about rules they may have forgotten to use or which they have used incorrectly, especially when it's to their advantage rather than your own. So this is an important one. I think this comes down to playing fair. Just reminding your opponent about rules they might be forgetting. Maybe they've got a +1 to hit. I know every time I play against a Stormcast Eternal player that's not my own, the amount of time Laylo the Tyrants is forgotten is pretty high. But, it just comes, and this will breed, I guess, a certain reputation to all your opponents if you do this sort of thing. If you go, oh, hey, you should be able to do this with this unit, or hey, you forgot to do this thing, do you want to do it before we move ahead, etc. Like, this is just another one of those things where people will learn to trust you, and this will be a good one for building your reputation as a trustworthy player. If you're doing things for your opponent's advantage rather than your own, reminding your opponent of things they forgot, or going, oh, hey, like those misses you picked up, one of them was actually a hit. Or don't forget to re-roll your ones here when they go to pick up their dice and they say, oh, they all of them missed. It just breeds a good sort of reputation for yourself to do this sort of thing. I think more than anything, this thing here, this point will give you a good reputation within your community if this is how you act. Never deliberately waste time during a game. This is probably more important in a match play setting where you're at a tournament or an event or something where you have round times. Or I guess where places are requiring you to sort of book in games and you have slots to play your game with an opponent. This is also apparent. Never deliberately waste time so that you can achieve victory in the game. This is known as slow playing and is very heavily frowned upon in the community as a whole. Now, there is a difference between slow playing and maybe just not being that experienced, and I think this comes to your opponent not knowing. And you know, you can make this known yourself and go, hey, I'm rather new, I'm going to try my best to play fast, but like making your opponent aware that, you know, you're a newer player, and then your opponent may actually give you some tips. Some tips for this that like I like to give my opponents, especially when playing more friendly games, is when we move, I like to move the back models forward. So like I move the back rank of a blob forward, all their movement, and then move the front rank forward, all their movement, and then you move every model in between so you don't have to measure every model. You can sort of, you know, keep your movement how it was, your formation how it was, but every model has moved the correct distance, or at least close enough that it's not going to matter. Next, avoid distracting an opponent when they are trying to concentrate, and be careful to respect their personal space. Once again, personal space is just another one of those things that you just should be doing at all times. Some people don't like being touched, don't like being sort of near other people. So this is definitely something to be aware of, especially when playing newer players. But avoid distracting your opponent as well. Try to let them, when they're trying to think, make a decision. Just don't talk to them, but maybe, you know, give them like you can always go, hey, this unit can do this unit can do that, these are your options here, and then let them make the choice on their own. Don't try and goad your opponent into a choice between the two things. It's generally not seen as the very nicest of play. Never complain about your bad luck or your opponent's good luck. This is an interesting one, because sometimes you will feel that like the dice just hate you on that day and your dice are loving your opponent. However, generally, as an opponent, when I know dice rolls are going my way and I can see my opponent's dice are not going my way, there's a way you can get around this to make it feel better at the table and go, man, damn, my dice rolls have been good today. You've been really unlucky as well, is something you can tell your opponent, because then your opponent doesn't have to go, my dice rolls suck. You can let them go, yeah, I've not rolled the best, and you can make them feel better and have a better conversation rather than being the player who complains about their dice rolls. You can, which happens. I feel like luck is just a part of the game, and sometimes things go for you and sometimes things go against you, and that's just how it goes sometimes. But, you know, at the end of the day, you need to realize that it is a dice game. Luck is part of the game. So definitely don't try not to complain about how good your opponent's luck was or how bad your luck was. And lastly, the last point they make is never collude with an opponent to fix the result of the game. This is straight up cheating. If you're colluding to fix the result, to say one of you wins, one of you loses, this is straight up cheating in a tournament as far as I'm concerned. So definitely something to not do. Of course, like, this isn't the sort of thing where you go, you've rolled turn 3 priority and you know that someone's got a double turn with a Cardinal Overlord's army and you've got 10 models left that you're dead. This isn't colluding, this is just realizing the obvious. Colluding is at the start of the game, both of you deciding, I'm going to throw this game so you can win, so you can do better. This is definitely not a way to go about it. And so there we have it. That's Games Workshop Age of Sigmar's version of the player's code. That's all their points. That's what I think of their player's codes. What do you think of all the points? Are there any maybe you're not a particular fan of, you think should be changed? What do you think? I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on this, on what they what they think are good things to do in a game and bad things to do in a game. I'd love to hear some thoughts in the comments below. Well, thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, if you'd like to come chat more with me and other members of our fine community here at Sinful Gaming, we've got a Discord server which you can find a link to in the description of the video. Next, why not, if you're here on YouTube already, go check out my featured channel section where there's a bunch of other fantastic Warhammer Age of Sigmar content creators putting out a bunch of fantastic Warhammer Age of Sigmar content, from battle reports, tactical videos, painting videos, and more besides. Lastly as well, thank you to everyone who supports the channel via Patreon and YouTube members. We'd like to give all of them a shout out on the channel for everyone who does so. So thank you to our patrons Christian Weir, James, Soren, Chaos Spawn, AJC, Kenny Lull, Outer and Shot First, James Crowder, Andrew Bowen, Nathan Fee, Tim Newman, The Rising Ape and Cure Dynamic. And thank you to our YouTube members Green Roots Gaming, Fire Titan, Steve T and The Real Zeop. Thank you all for supporting the channel, and if you'd like to help support the channel like these fine people do, you can do so by following the link in the description to either Patreon or YouTube members. Thank you all once again for watching. Stay safe everyone, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the grey. Ciao for now.